Yesterday we began discussing the verse in Mishlei where Shlomo Melech tells us in Proverbs, Ki ner mitzvah v'torah or, and says, Derech Musar tochochas chayim, v'derech chayim tochochas musar. Ki ner mitzvah Torah or, v'derech chayim, and the path of life is tochochas musar. It's being informed of information which allows a person to restrain and suppress his inclinations. That's derech chayim. So the Maral had explained that a ner, which means a candle, is a receptacle. It's the oil, it's the wick, and then you ignite the wick. That's the mitzvah. Any mitzvah we do is directly connected to our bodies, to our physicality. You put on tefillin, you put on tzitzis, you eat matzah, you sit in the sukkah. It's our physicality is involved. The moment the soul leaves the body, there's no mitzvah any longer. Everything ceases to function. The moment the fuel is expended, the wick turns into carbon, there's no light any longer. So the light only illuminates as long as there's the physicality of the receptacle and the fuel. Torah is something which is unrelated to the physicality of the person. Torah is directly abstract, intangible, it's conceptual, and it has directly rooted in our soul. The soul functions independent of the body. The body does not function independent of the soul. Therefore, the mitzvah, the Talmud tells us that when one does a mitzvah, even with a proper intent, it only protects you as long as you're doing the mitzvah. You merit divine protection. The moment you cease doing the mitzvah, one does not have the divine protection any longer. But when you study Torah, the Torah itself that you had studied previously protects you even after you cease studying it. So he explains why. Just as the body itself, the physicality of the world, functions within the context of time, and it's finite, anything which is related to time, it's at the moment. Therefore, since the mitzvah is determined through the action of the person, and the person is physical, and the human being lives within time, therefore, the outgrowth of that takes on that characteristics of limitation. Therefore, it only protects you only when you're engaging in itself. You cease engaging in the mitzvah, you no longer have the divine protection. But the study of Torah, which is not connected to the physicality of the person, it transcends it. It's outside of physicality. It's not time-bound. And because it's not time-bound, as a result of that, it surpasses the moment. And therefore, even after you cease studying, you merit the divine protection of that study of Torah. This is the Maral of Prague, as I'm explaining it. Therefore, it's Torah or. The Torah is the illuminator. It illuminates even beyond the moment you study, it keeps illuminating. Its effect continues. The mitzvah, as I said, it is only divine as you're doing it. Of course, it sanctifies, you receive unlimited reward for it. But in terms of the innateness of it, to be able to bring it about, it's only due to the person's participation through the physical. Now, he explains, he says something interesting. The Gemara tells us in one location that if you want to be a chassid, you want to be scrupulously pious, devoutly pious, there's a question, what should you study? One opinion is you should study Mili de Avos. You should study Tractate Avos, Pirkei Avos. If you want to be devoutly pious, scrupulously pious. The other one says you should study the laws of torts, damages, nizikin. And the other one says if you want to be devoutly pious, you study the laws of blessings. So the Maharal of Prague explains they're all in agreement. Each one's just addressing another aspect of what has to do to be able to achieve that level of spirituality that you classified as a devoutly, scrupulously pious person. So he says something interesting. A human being is comprised of three things. You're comprised of a life source, a spirit, and a soul. All three. This spirit or the life source, that's our physicality, our movement, our involvement. If a person who's naturally a damager, he's not concerned for other people's possessions, so he damages them. What we speak of damage, there's no benefit of damage. So if a person is a damager, what does that say about his being? There's something very negative about that being. Person goes and indulges in something which is desire. There's a benefit, the desire, he's satisfying desire. But if a person goes and he damages and destroys, there's no benefit. That emanates from a maliciousness or a lack of consideration for somebody else. So that's a defect in the life source of the person. So if you want to perfect that life source of your own, you have to study the laws of damages. To what degree you have to be careful and have a level of foresight that you should never do anything, that there should be any, even indirect cause to cause somebody else a loss. And if a person has that level of sensitivity, then his life source is really on a special level because he's continuously honing it and perfecting it and sensitizing it by learning the laws of torts and damages to understand what is and what's not. So if you want to be the chosid and perfect that aspect of your being, which is the life source, you should study the laws of torts. If you want to be the special person, another opinion says you should study Pirkei Avos, the laws of ethics, how to behave, what is considered quality behavior, what is considered not quality behavior. That's within the person himself. That's the essence of the person. That is the spirit. And then we speak about the laws of brachos, blessings. What is a blessing? A blessing is an acknowledgement. Firstly, acknowledging that things don't happen by themselves. Everything in life is an endowment. But God wills that there should be various amenities available to us, that mankind should be able to benefit from those amenities which God created, whether it's the fruit of the tree, the fruit of the ground, or all came about through his word. That has to do with the soul. You're perfecting the soul, because that's your relation with God. So if a person goes and addresses the laws of blessings, the laws of torts, you study those laws, and Pirkei Avos, the laws of ethics, how we have to behave to be a quality person, we address every aspect of our being. The Talmud tells us in one location, there were three gifts given to the Jewish people. What are the three gifts? The Torah was given to us. The land of Israel was given to us as a gift. And Olam Haba, and the world to come, was given to us. Three gifts. However, these three gifts don't come about easily. To be able to be qualified to receive these gifts, they come about through Yisurim. There's a degree of suffering. You have to really pay the price to be qualified to receive that gift. And he goes to explain that what is the concept of Yisurim? Yisurim is always suffering. It's payment. Whenever we suffer, it minimizes and it compromises our physicality. That's what it is. Anything that has to do with Kedusha, with sanctity, which is godliness, physicality is the farthest thing from godliness. When a person goes and he toils to study Torah, what does that mean? He's compromising his physicality. He's willing to minimize his physicality for the sake of that holiness. So by minimizing the physicality, you become less physical, less earthy. By becoming less earthy, you become worthy of that gift, which is the relationship with God, which is the Torah itself. We find the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went to receive the Torah on behalf of the Jewish people, he spent 40 days and 40 nights in heaven. And he shares with the Jewish people, when he was in heaven, he says, Lechem lo achalti, mayim lo shasisi. When I was in heaven, I did not eat bread and I did not drink water. Me miraculously lived there without any physical sustenance. So the Midrash asks, and if he would have eaten bread and drunk water, why is this information pertinent and crucial for us to know? That when he received the Torah for those 40 days, he did not have any physical nourishment, not bread, not water. So the Midrash tells us, what Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the Jewish people, that just as I, during that 40-day period, Mosarti domi v'chel b'yoleo, I gave my blood and my fat for the sake of Torah. Factually speaking, Moshe Rabbeinu was physically minimized during those 40 days and 40 nights. That he lived was a miracle, without sustenance. But factually, it had an effect. It had a physical consequence on his body. So meaning, the only way he was qualified to have the capacity to be the repository of Torah was only by minimizing his physicality. Because the Torah is the ultimate in spirituality and allows us to have a relationship with God. Therefore, what qualifies us, I think there's a greater qualification to be the repository of Torah and merit the divine assistance to process it. It's a minimization of our physicality. That's why you acquire it through Yisurim, through a degree of suffering. As we say in life, there are no free rides in life. Everything has a cost factor, even though it may be a material cost. But here, and what's the return? It's an exchange, physical for physical. When it comes to Torah, the exchange is the ultimate exchange. By compromising your physical, because you only are more qualified to enter the spiritual realm if you're less physical. So you have to assume a persona of less physical to have greater relevance to the spiritual. And then we're worthy of a gift. A gift is always from the benefactor. The beneficiary is the receiver of the gift, but it's a one-sided affair. The benefactor is giving the gift. Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, is referred to as the Holy Land. It's God's location. As we mentioned, every location in the world has an archangel overseeing that location. The world was divided among the 70 root nations of the world, 70 nations. Each root nation has an archangel. So that location which that root nation identifies with has an archangel overseeing that location. Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, has no archangel. That land, that location was given to the Jewish people. We have a direct connection to God. God oversees that location. And because God has that direct connection with the location, that's why the land itself is called the Holy Land. Because anything which is associated with God assumes a holy status. So to have relevance to that, what do we have to do to be worthy, to be qualified to acquire that and to have that? You have to compromise your physicality. Therefore, it's niknas al yidei surim. It's only acquired through compromising our physicality. There's a suffering involved. You're willing to sacrifice, to compromise yourself for the sake of that. Olam haba, the world to come. What's the world to come? It's a relation with God. It's a total, but the most spiritual reality in existence. That's the world to come. How does one acquire and merit or share in the world to come? That means when you're confronted with a challenge and you resist the challenge and you suppress the desire not to go against the will of God. What's suppression of desire? Reining in on inclination. There's a pain factor. There's a compromise on yourself. What about if you have to motivate yourself? A person has a natural inertia not to do something, and you have an obligation to perform a positive commandment. What does that mean? That means you have to go forward. You have to be proactive. But you prefer to be laid back, to procrastinate, put it off. But yet we have a principle. When a mitzvah presents itself, you should not allow it to become leavened. You're not permitted to delay it. Immediate. That immediacy, attending to it, that's going against the grain. Whenever you go against the grain at any level, there's a compromise on one's essence, on one's being, on one's physicality. That's the world to come. The way you acquire a share in the world to come, as somebody once said, what does God want from us? Not to do what we want to do, but to do what we don't want to do. What we want to do is what we're inclined to do. The challenge of life is not to do what you want to do, but to do what God wants you to do, which is going against the grain, suppressing all the inclinations, all the desires, and going against the inertia of a human being to be motivated to do at a moment where you're not in a position or an interest to be motivated. You overcome that. That's spirituality. To have relevance to holiness, which is the world to come, to the land of Israel, which is relation with God, or Torah, which is the ultimate entity of holiness, it's only you acquire it with Yisurim. You have to compromise your physicality. King Solomon tells us in Proverbs, Tzaddik ochel l'sov nafsho. When a tzaddik eats, it's only to save his soul, nothing more than that. Now, we enjoy eating, and if I take another portion, another morsel, is it so terrible? You're not in violation of anything. We're not saying you're in violation. But if you want to make the grade, you have to understand who you have to be. The tzaddik only eats to save his soul. Because anything other than saving your soul automatically is a compromise on your spiritual capacity. So you want to maximize to have the greatest degree of spiritual capacity. So by minimizing your physicality, it makes you more qualified to be the domicile for holiness. Because you're less physical. That's the concept. If you want to be a chassid, devoutly, scrupulously pious, you study Pirkei Avos. What is a quality person? Is the person who wears the Barioni suit and the Hermes silk scarf and he wears that diamond pinky ring and all this, whatever it is in the material, that's not the quality person. Quality person is the essence of the person. What's quality? Person who's, when you see him, you say he's a prince. And we're talking about a person who knows what a prince is. Princely behavior, princely character, sterling character. If you want to have that sterling, princely persona, you have to study the laws of ethics of our fathers. This was given at Sinai. As I once said, the introduction to Pirkei Avos is the order of transmission from Sinai. Because you would think our great rabbis, they were sociologists, psychologists, they understood what a person should be, has nothing to do with them. These behavior patterns or these sensitivities or considerations, this was ordained at Sinai, as you must wear tefillin at Sinai. That's when it was ordained, how a Jew has to behave in every aspect of his interaction, man and his fellow. This was ordained at Sinai. How we have to treat the poor, how our homes have to be open to the poor, how we have to desire the study of Torah, how we have to see ourselves in terms of humility. How does one achieve humility? How does one fend off all kinds of negative influences? All this is contained here. So how do you become that quality, elite person? Elite in the true sense of elite, not elitist, to be elite. You have to study this. So if you want to be the chassid, you want to be the devout person, scrupulously pious, where God sees you as that special person, that's what you have to study. I once told a story, Moshe Feinstein, as I said, even a person who's exemplary in between man and his fellow, as exemplary is, he can't hold up a candle to where Moshe Feinstein was, who was the leading Torah sage of his generation when he lived. He passed away at the age of 95, 35 years ago. I mentioned the story in terms of his sensitivity to a fellow human being. When he was older, and he had a driver who would drive him and take him wherever he wanted to go. And his driver was a person who was an older person, not an old person. He was already in his 50s. He wasn't the person who was fully functional, wasn't married. And this person's whole pride and joy, his value in life, and his whole self-esteem was that he was Rabbi Feinstein's personal driver. That was his glory. And he was known, he is Rabbi Feinstein's driver, personal driver. And he's always at his beck and call. And he felt privileged to be at Rabbi Feinstein's beck and call. And one day, Rabbi Feinstein, an older person, when he gets into a car, he just can't just slip into the seat. He has to hold on to the frame of the car to allow him to lower himself onto the seat. And this person didn't realize it. And as Ramosh is still holding to the frame of the car, he slams the door on his fingers. You could imagine how excruciating that pain was. Ramosha Feinstein did not utter a sound, not a sound. Why? Because he knew if he'd utter that sound, he would destroy this person. This person, his life would be destroyed because he would feel he failed as a human being, as who he's supposed to be. How could he bring injury and pain upon this holy rabbi? So he failed as who he's supposed to be. If a person, God forbid, gets his hand slammed in a door, do you know what kind of level of, that means every moment of Ramosha's conscious, awake moment, he was cognizant of every moment. Otherwise, it's impossible to restrain the sound of pain because it's something which is instantaneous. You respond immediately, but he was able to suppress it. That's the level of control he had. So as a person whose quality, who's exemplary between man and his fellow, not to hurt a person as much as an iota, not to take everything into consideration. At what level do you have to be? We're told this person's a saint. His behavior is saintly behavior. It's not ordinary. Where I told a story Somebody had called Rabbi Feinstein from Israel 3:00 in the morning to ask a halachic question. And the person didn't realize the time difference. And he called whatever time, it was like 10 o'clock in the morning, it was 3 in the morning. And Rabbi Feinstein immediately answers the phone. And the person says he wants to ask the great rabbi a halachic question. So he says to him, could you just wait, please wait just a few moments. And it took about 3 minutes to get back onto the phone. Why did it take him 3 minutes? Because when he woke up, he had to wash his hands. He had to say the blessings before he engages in Torah study, because he has to respond. And he answers and he responds to the person's question. And then before he hangs up the phone on the person, he says to her, could you please give me your address? We live in Israel. And he figured he didn't understand why. Maybe he wanted to send him the copy of the ruling that he'd given him. What do you think he wanted his address for? That because he kept him waiting on the phone for 3 minutes, the cost of the phone call, because of Rabbi Feinstein, was a few dollars. He mailed him a check because he was the cause that it cost him an extra few dollars because he had to wait for Rabbi Feinstein to get back on the phone. You understand what this is? He wakes him up 3 in the morning due to not thinking that there's a time difference. And he wants Rabbi Feinstein to accommodate him to respond to him. And because Rabbi Feinstein had to wait and delay to get on the phone, to be in a proper moment to be able to respond, Rabbi Feinstein felt he has to compensate and reimburse this person for holding him on the phone. You tell me what this is. This is not saintly behavior. It's unheard of. But do you think this comes out of a vacuum? If you study the laws of ethics of our fathers, you study the laws of blessings, you study laws of torts, you're sensitive to everything. There's no area in your life of your development that there's no sensitivity. And due to this exceptional, sensitive senses regarding another human being, for you, it's natural. It's understand that's what you're supposed to do. You don't even see it as saintly behavior. It's the appropriate, the right thing to do. And that's who he was.